think in a sense I've got the graveyard slot because I've somehow, thank you, I've got to make it the football slot, exactly. Anyway, I'm a Sloan like everybody else in this room, and I must say the Sloan transformed my life. It helped me do what I do now. And what I want to do now is talk about networks. Throughout the day, almost every speaker has used the word networks, connections, relationships, and part of me thought, oh my God, they're doing my presentation for me. And the other half of me thought, no, they're reinforcing what I want to do. I've got a short slot, so I thought what I would do is, it is of course a cliche, but try and give you 10 top tips, 10 things to think about when you go about building and nurturing your professional networks. Some ideas, some tips, some empowerment even. The first thing I think we need to say is networking is really, really important. We all know that. So you need to make time for it. It's not something that happens by itself. It's an investment. So if you don't make the time, it won't happen. People have talked about this already today, but if you're, let's say, applying for a job, everyone else applying for the job will probably have similar skills, similar CV, the things that you need for the job. What will make you stand out, what will turn you into the yellow umbrella, as opposed to the sea of rather boring grey umbrellas, are those soft interpersonal skills, that ability to get on with people. So it's not an optional extra. It's definitely a must-have. So make time for it. Obviously, you all, in one level, realise that or you wouldn't be here today. You're here not just to learn, but also to meet fellow Sloans. Research by someone Rob Cross is from the University of Virginia. What really distinguishes high performers from the rest of the pack is their ability to maintain and leverage personal networks. The most effective high performers create and tap large, diversified networks that are rich in experience and span organizational boundaries. Lots of, I could cite more, lots of good academic research showing building a network works. So that's the first one. Second point, realize that we live in a small world. I'm sure many of you have heard the term 6 degrees of separation. Yeah, the idea that we're all separated by a maximum of 6 handshakes. The phrase was coined, in fact, by Stanley Milgram, who some of you may have heard of in connection with other experiments. But in this particular one, he was trying to get a letter to a stockbroker in Massachusetts, and he sent 160 people an academic letter saying, I'm doing the research, please would you help me? Please would you forward this letter? I want this letter to reach a particular stockbroker in Boston. If you know them by any miracle yourself, you can send it directly. But on the assumption that you don't, please would you send it to someone you think is more likely to know them. Maybe you have a friend in Boston, maybe you know your local stockbroker, whatever. The results, let me just first say, before he published his results, he asked some of his colleagues, what do you think my results will look like? And people were saying, oh, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 connections. What he actually found was the vast majority got there in 5 or 6 steps, which is where that phrase 6 degrees of separation comes from. Yeah? We are much more connected than we realize. If I was doing a whole workshop, we would do some role plays and some exercises to see how easily and how well connected we are, yeah? And how easy it is to get to wherever it is you want to go. So realize, and I do realize that this image appears in lots of presentations with all sorts of different meanings. I saw it in at least one this morning. But the idea is that you should talk to people without any necessarily idea of where it might lead. You talk because it's interesting to chat to people. Someone this morning talked about not underestimating the power of serendipity. Yeah? And that is partly what I'm talking about. You never know who knows whom. You may know someone for years and years, but what you actually know about their network is just that tiny little 10% that's peeking above the surface. What you don't know is all the other people they know. So it's really important just to talk to people. It also, I think, takes away that agenda of, well, are you worth talking to? Can you do anything for me? You're just someone I'm talking to. And if something good comes of it, great. So, number 3, value acquaintances as well as friends. Another researcher, Mark Granovetter, was looking at how people found jobs. You won't be surprised to know that the network was very important. What might surprise you is, of that half, the vast majority, over 80%, were actually getting information about jobs through someone they didn't know terribly well, an acquaintance rather than a friend. Any thoughts, suggestions why? Why that might be? Suddenly everyone's... Yes?
That person has a completely different network.
Thank you. Bingo. There is one other element. One is that you have more acquaintances than you have friends by definition. There are more of them. But Fleming, from my class, good for you, pointed out, if you think about your friends in a work context, same company, same department, same profession, whatever, if, let's say, you're looking for a job, they might say to you, did you know that company ABC is hiring? And you probably would know that. You'd say yes. If you then think about the people who are a little bit further away, different company, different department, wherever you draw that line, they might be able to contribute information that you didn't know, that company XYZ is hiring, for example. So I'm not saying, and please don't go away and say you listen to this strange woman saying that friends don't matter. I'm not saying that. Of course they matter hugely in our personal and our professional lives. But what I am saying is what we often say is, oh, I've only met him once, he doesn't really matter. And that's a mistake, because what you need to do is broaden your network. So the overlap is greatest. Number 4, connect people. With modern with technology, it's now much easier to map networks. And what you find is that we aren't all connected by 6 degrees of separation. We're all connected to a few really well-connected people, and they know everyone else. Yeah? Those are the people, let me slip one slide, who are sociologists call connectors. I like to think of them as natural shortcuts. It's not a very flattering image, but I think networks are a bit like lumpy porridge. And the connectors are those lumps. Yeah? Again, I'm sure all of you know someone, maybe yourself, who you would think of as a connector. Yeah? Usually they're people who are generous with their connections, who like introducing people to each other. And that's one of the core lessons, I think, to be learned about connecting, which is that, you know that phrase that the rich get richer? Well, nowhere is it more true than in terms of networks. The more you are known as somebody who knows interesting people and is willing to make the connections, the more people will want to connect to you, and the better connected you will become. So it's this very nice virtuous circle. So recognize the lumps and be a little bit more of a connector yourself. Writing an email saying, Fred, meet Mary, I've just realized you're both interested in loyalty schemes in Poland, doesn't take very long to do. And sometimes it can be very valuable for people. So be more of a connector yourself, more of a lump yourself. Get out and about. Obvious, but worth repeating. A nice quote I like from John le Carré: a desk is a dangerous place from which to view the world. I don't care how much we talk about technology and social media, actually looking someone in the eye, actually meeting someone is hard to replace and hard to substitute for something else. Again, you all know this or you wouldn't be here. One of the reasons you're here is to meet new people. And the amazing Sloan race, which comes straight after this, will throw you into groups where you don't know people. Giving can be better than getting. A lot of people feel very uncomfortable about networks and networking. It's manipulative, it's self-seeking. If you start trying a little bit to change your attitude, then I think things become a lot more comfortable. One of the stories I always tell, when I came to LBS, one of my aims was to change direction. And at the time, I was sort of 3/4 of the way through the year, I thought that what I wanted to do was branding and branding consultancy. And a classmate of mine, Steve, was doing for his master's thesis, I mean, bear in mind this was 1998, 20 years ago, He was doing the business plan for a handheld device that would act like a tourist guide. So it would say, you know, turn right, turn second left, and you'll be in Regent's Park. And then it would tell you about Regent's Park and who the Prince Regent founded in 1812 or whatever, etc. That's what, I mean, any smartphone more or less can do that for you now, but 20 years ago that was quite a revolutionary idea. And Steve, he had the technical information, he knew how to get it all done. What he didn't have was the content, the bit that told you about Regent's Park. So he asked me, he said, you used to work in publishing. Do you know anyone at Dorling Kindersley? I'm sure you know the publisher that do a lot of travel guides. And I said, no, don't know anyone, never worked with them. And then I thought for a moment, and I said, well, but I think I've heard on the grapevine that David Holmes, who I used to work with at HarperCollins, I'm sure someone told me he'd moved to DK. I'll phone, find out. I phoned, and I was right. He had moved, and he spoke to me. Very interested in Steve's project, told me who Steve should speak to, and said he could mention his name as a introduction. And then we sort of, you know, started chatting. How are you? What are you doing? I'm at business school. What do you plan to do afterwards? I said, well, one of the things I'm very interested in is branding. Oh, yes, he said. And do you have a job? I said, no. When do you finish? I said, a couple of months. Come and talk to me. The end result was that Steve got to speak to the people at DK, got his project finished, got his degree. Sadly, he never got the project off the ground, or he'd be presumably one of those multimillionaires by now. But I got my first job after LBS as Brand Development Director of Dorling Kindersley, all because I made one phone call for Steve, for a friend. There was no way I would have got the job otherwise. They weren't advertising. I'd lost touch with David. Now, I'm not saying that every time you do a favour, wonderful things happen. But most of those favours are really, you know, it was a 5-minute phone call. Most of those things that are helpful for other people are really easy for ourselves to give. So think about giving, not getting. With apologies to the Americans in the room, ask not what your network can do for you, ask what you can do for your network. It's a much more comfortable frame of mind. Be interested as well as interesting. There's a lot of emphasis on, you know, your elevator pitch, what do you say when people ask what do you do, etc., which is all very important. But actually, what really starts to build connections is finding this central spot, which should be green, but I can never make the blue and the yellow somehow to come out green in PowerPoint. The combination, the bit which you connect to. So when you're out a little bit later doing the Sloan race, try and see what are the things that connect you, apart from the obvious one, which is the Sloan. What else is it? What else do you have in common? What else can you use as the foundation to build a relationship? Nurture your network. It's fairly obvious, but again, it takes effort, it takes time, it takes commitment. If you meet someone and you never stay in touch with them, that's fine, but there won't be much of a relationship. If you meet someone that you think is worth connecting with, you need to build on that relationship and follow up. Any excuse. Your news, their news, there's a million reasons for staying in touch. The result of today's football match, it's as good as any other. That is an email I got from actually a classmate of mine. Happy St. Patrick's Day. He wasn't Irish, I'm not Irish. I thought it was really sweet. He sent that to my ex-business partner, who thought it was a bloody waste of time. And I suppose the reason I put it up there is to say that sometimes when you stay in touch, you get it wrong. But if you don't stay in touch at all, you've lost the connection. So it's worth taking perhaps a slight risk and building those relationships over the long term. Because trust doesn't happen, you know, just like that. It takes time. Practice makes perfect. Again, obvious stuff. And when I'm working with, shall we say, younger MBA students, one of the things I say to them is, if you find it really difficult to start a conversation with a stranger, do it in the post office queue. Do it at Sainsbury's. If you make a complete fool of yourself, it actually doesn't matter. If you wait till you're talking to the dean of the business school and you want to make a good impression, then it matters, yeah? And certainly one of the advantages of getting a little bit older is it becomes a lot easier. I can start a conversation with almost anybody nowadays. I don't care what they think of me. So practice makes perfect. Herminia Barrow, who is now at LBS, is one of her areas of interest is careers and career progression and career change. And I like this quote very much because it says, you know, we have seen over and over again that people who work at networking can learn not only how to do it, but also how to enjoy it. And they tend to be more successful in their careers. It's worth doing, you can learn to do it, and actually it can be quite pleasant. Yeah? So, last but not least, make your own luck. I don't know if anyone's come across Richard Wiseman. He's a psychology professor, I think at the University of Hertfordshire, and he studies strange things like how magic works. I mean, how we manage to confuse people and magic tricks. But he looked at luck and looked at people who think they're lucky. And what he found, you know, several shared characteristics. One, people who are lucky enough, people who are lucky put themselves in the path of good luck. It's obvious, but if you never enter a competition, you won't win one. Yeah? So you have to be out there doing stuff. The second thing he found was that people who are lucky have the right attitude. They see the glass as half full. They see a room full of strangers as an opportunity, whereas some people would see it as a threat. Yeah? And third, and most interesting to me, all the people who thought they were lucky have active, vibrant networks. If you think about it, all I'm saying, you know the song, I'll get by with a little help from my friends. That's all networks really are. Yeah? There's academic research to prove that it's not just a song, it's true. So, on that basis, let's move on to the next. Have I done it on time? Am I a good girl?